want to move up, feel free, in case we have some latecomers and they feel self-conscious about having to move to the front, but if you're comfortable where you are, that's fine too. So welcome to the panel of the Nevertheless Writers, which is a cross-generational panel. Oh, well, I'm reading straight from the script.
We're not as much cross-generational as we might like to be.
I don't know.
Well, yes, we go down by decade. By year.
So they're each going to speak to a different aspect of the writing process. There'll be a question and answer period and a meet and greet. And they'll each have books available for purchase and signing, which are up here on the tables. So I'm going to introduce you to them, and hopefully I have them in the right order. So this is Elizabeth Atkinson, and she has written books such as From Alice to Zen, I Am a Freak, and The Sugar Mountain Snowball, which will be released this fall. And she'll speak about the writing process. And then in the second slot, we have Suzanne DeWitt Hall, who has written Building a Portfolio, if I have that correct, hopefully.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's what you're talking about building a writing portfolio,
Yes,
is that right?
exactly.
All right, and then in the third slot, we have Holly Robinson, who's written The Wishing Hill and Beach Plum Island and Haven Lake. Yep. All right. I said don't hold it against me. And then in the fourth slot, we have Susan Paradis, who will present on the illustrator's perspective of things. And this is hopefully going to be enjoyable for everyone and very informative, and so I will turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Well, thank you all for coming tonight, for having us here.
Come on in,
We
don't be
appreciate the
shy.
Groveland Library having us tonight. I want to explain real quickly, the Nevertheless Writers got together as a cross-genre group. I write for the children's market, and so does Susan. Suzanne and Holly, Nancy and Edith, who aren't here, they write for the adult market. And we decided to get together to be more interesting for our audience to have a cross-genre panel. Often you just see a children's book writer or a mystery writer, a romance in one genre. And we just thought this would be more supportive for the writing community, more fun for us, and like we said, for our readers to introduce you to possibly new authors you didn't know about. I have to explain, we usually, Nancy Crocher is not here tonight. She was supposed to be here. Nancy is our humor writer. You might have read her column in the Eagle Trib and the Newburyport Daily News for 15 years. She wrote a humor column called The Motherlode. Nancy is actually in a movie in Boston, a big movie. She's an extra. And she got called in today, and she's stuck there on set, and she can't come tonight. It's going into overtime.
You didn't add that she's stuck with Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper, Robert De Niro, and Jennifer Lawrence.
Poor thing.
Yeah. So she apologizes if she can't be here tonight. Nancy was going to touch a little bit about getting an agent in that process. So if you have any questions afterward, feel free to ask that. And then Edith is actually recuperating from surgery last week. Edith is a cozy mystery author. Some of you may know her series. So Suzanne, our wonderful colleague and writer, who is very accomplished, has agreed to fill in this week for Edith. So anyway, we're a little bit mixed up this week, but please feel free to ask any questions at the end. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the writing process. We're each going to have little mini topics that we think might be valuable for you to know. Are all of you, or is everyone interested in writing in this room? Are you just, most people are interested in writing, writing books? We find most people are who come to these events. I just want to touch on 3 challenges I found starting out in the writing process, and to this day I have the same challenges. First of all, when you're particularly when you're writing a book.
Start now because the clock is ticking.
Yeah, the clock is ticking.
That's right. Don't linger anymore on that manuscript. Yep, keep moving ahead.
That's right. Done. When you're writing a book, the hardest part to get started is to actually make yourself do it, because you don't have deadlines. You have to have self-imposed deadlines. That's a really difficult part about getting started, as you all know. So I urge you, if this is a problem, which it is for 99% of people who write, things that help to get you started and to keep you on a schedule are writing groups. Writing groups are excellent to start out with. I have to say, I've been in many writing groups. I have found they're not for me now that I'm kind of on my own path. I have one or two readers that I like to bounce my ideas off and my manuscripts, but almost everybody here does work in writing groups, and they're great because you have to be ready for your writing group. You have to keep writing, and so you have to meet those deadlines. Another way is to enter contests. That's how I got started, is by entering writing contests. There are tons of them. Not only do they help you build up your portfolio and get you in shape and help you shape your voice. Again, if it's a book contest, you're writing a book, you're working on a deadline. So do whatever it takes to set up those deadlines, because otherwise it's really hard for you to stay focused and finish a book. It's very common too to want to start a new book when you're in the middle of another one. If you're writing a book, it's important to try to stay on track and finish that book if you want to write it and complete it, and not let yourself get distracted. That's the hardest part. You're in the middle of a book and you get really tired of it all of a sudden. So sticking with it and having those deadlines. Secondly, as a writer starting out, I was a freelance writer, but I always saw myself as becoming an author someday. That was my goal. And one of the things that really bothered me about myself is I'm not disciplined. I'm not naturally disciplined. And I see people smiling, a lot of creative people aren't disciplined. It's kind of comes with the territory. In fact, I kind of fight structure and discipline. I don't like the days to be the same every day. And if you are disciplined, you are so far ahead of the game, because that's what so much of it is about, is being disciplined and making yourself right. If you aren't that disciplined, don't worry, you can still get things accomplished. I am not the type of person who gets up at 5 every morning. I didn't do it when my kids were little and write for 3 hours. I don't write the same every day. You have to figure out what works for you. For me, what works, I can't just write in spurts a few hours every day. I have to block off like a week, and I warn the family, okay, I'm writing this week. And no one wants to go near me because I'm in the zone, I'm not cooking, I'm not doing anything, this is what I'm working on. When my kids were younger, they're grown now, I would tell my husband, I need this weekend to write. I'm scheduling this weekend. And he would know, okay, I'll take the kids and we'll go do something. Don't open the door, whatever. If you need to do that, schedule the time to write and stick to it. The hardest part about writing is feeling like you're not wasting time. Particularly if you spend a whole weekend writing and then you end up deleting 3/4 of it, a week later. But you can't think that way. You have to schedule the time and treat it like a job and call yourself a writer. You have to put aside the time. And thirdly, this is the other thing that made me feel like it was inauthentic, like I'm not really a writer. Because writing to this day for me is really hard to do. And for some people, I know it comes really easily. For me, it doesn't. It doesn't just flow out of me. It's like every page is such an effort for me. And I reshape and revise hundreds of times. It can be an agonizing process for me. But for some reason, I am compelled to write books. And I'm not quite sure why. It's just, I always think of the next one, but the next one's just as agonizing. It's like childbirth, right? You just have kids, you forget about it, and you start over again. But I was so surprised to hear other authors, and to this day, who say, no, writing is really hard work for me. It doesn't come easily. Part of it for me is I'm a character-driven writer. Plot doesn't come easily for me, and I think that's part of it. But if writing's hard for you and you still want to do it, believe me, it's hard for a lot of people to do it, and it doesn't get easier. So anyway, that's 3 things I want to touch on about writing process. Feel free to ask any of us questions. We all have a very different process, believe me. And what I tell kids when I go to schools, there is no right way to write. Whatever works for you is fine, and at any pace. I'll turn over to Suzanne.
Well, I'm going to talk about building your writing portfolio. I've done a lot of writing in a lot of different venues, and I'm working on my novel right now. And in a few weeks, well, that's probably an exaggeration. I hope to be done soon. Let me just put it that way. So once you have a project ready, whether it's a novel or even a strong journalistic piece or a nonfiction book, once you're ready to roll, you want to get someone to publish it for you. You need to have a body of work that they can refer to. And preferably, it's not all on your own blog or on your own whatever social media sites. Preferably, it's out there in the world, and you can provide a list of links. So that's what we're going to talk about. I left this. This is a magazine that I write for regularly. Merrimack Valley Magazine is a regional magazine. This, just I forgot to mention it, is an article about the upcoming Newburyport Literary Fest in April. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. It's a great event, and several of the authors on this panel are participating. So I don't know if you all are, but. So what I'm working on, I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. I've got a children's book called Rumple Pimple about a little dog hero that's coming out very shortly. We're self-publishing and waiting for the artist to get the files uploaded, so that's really close. I've got my novel. I've got some other children's projects. I've got some nonfiction stuff. And I write for Merrimack Valley Magazine all the time. And I'm pitching other magazines all the time and not getting picked up by them. So it was interesting to work on this because I thought, I should really be doing this, because I was thinking outside of my own experience and thinking what I should be doing. So that was kind of useful. So the little piece I handed out are the bullets that I'm going to go over. And the first is to think about what makes your voice unique. What's the hallmark of you when you write? Some people might be sort of gritty and hard-hitting if they're trying to do, digging into deep subjects. You might be lyrical and poetic. You might be a humor writer, as Nancy is, who's on the movie set today. My voice is sort of visual, with a little touch of poetry and humor and a little bit of mystical stuff thrown in. So it's useful for you to think about that ahead of time, because when you're building your portfolio, you want it to really represent who you are as a writer and present the best possible you. So kind of really paying attention to making sure who you are is known, is readable in what you're posting out there. And write about your passions, because then it's going to be strong writing just comfortably and naturally. You might be passionate about parenting because you've got young kids and you're seeing and experiencing things. You might be passionate about robotics or horses or kimchi. Who knows? But finding those things that you feel really strongly about is going to help make it easier for you to write well, and it's going to help make it easier for you to find the right places to place these pieces. For me, I really like vintage cookbooks. So I've got a cookbook. You'll see my split personality disorder on my on my slips because of all my different blogs, which are very different in content. So I like vintage cookbooks. So I started a cookbook blog that I haven't done much with, but I really like writing about theology, and I'm drawn by humans in general and kind of figuring them out. So writing about those types of things are going to make it easier for me to just kind of get excited about what I'm writing. So once you're kind of understanding your voice and are writing about the things that make you get excited, the things you can, sort of low-hanging fruit you can go after is local markets, identifying the community newspapers. There's lots of them around here. You can even start with letters to the editor. When we first moved to Newburyport, my wife Diane submitted a blog post that I wrote about, it was in politicking season, and we were disgusted with hearing about everything. And I wrote this post because I had to go to Richdale's to buy a pound of coffee, and I was outraged at the price. And so I just wrote this emotional thing about how the ridiculousness of politics and you can't even you have to worry about coffee. And she submitted it, and they picked it, and I didn't even know, and they picked it up as a letter to the editor. So, those kinds of pieces don't have to be just, complaining because people aren't picking up after their dogs when they're walking them around the streets or whatever. You can write about anything you want, try to give it a local spin and get it in as a letter to the editor, as a starting point. Regional magazines. I showed you Merrimack Valley, excuse me, Holly. So After trying to get into the Newburyport Daily News repeatedly, without much luck, I started going after magazines. There's North Shore magazine, there's some New Hampshire magazines, there's Merrimack Valley. I pitched a story, and they liked it, and I've been writing for them ever since. So my portfolio is building because of that. After a few months that the magazine has been out, I scan the articles and put them on the website so that people could read them there. But they're primarily that one venue, that one outlet, that one form of media, so I've got to expand it. But they're great. And there's a lot of them, and it takes you to that next step. It's kind of a progression of building, I think. The other way to go is to target the periodicals around your interest or your expertise level. I'll wave these around now. Some years ago I worked in the translation industry and internationalization of software. So I started writing for this magazine called Multilingual Computing and Technology. Exciting.
Impressive.
Yeah, so I wrote for them all the time. And so that can be a bridge way too, to moving to the projects that you want to do. If you have expertise in an area that doesn't even excite you that much, you can try to pitch and get in there for a while, building up your portfolio, and then when you pitch elsewhere, you'll have a little more ground. If you're involved with a nonprofit organization, you could find where they have maybe their website, maybe they have newsletters, write for them, and you're doing good work helping the cause and also finding things that are applicable for your editors. And then guest blogging. That's, find blogs that write about things that you're interested in, connecting back into your passions, and then offer to write a blog post periodically, and making sure you're capturing everything so that you can build your base. Then the last thing is to connect the topics that you're writing about to your project. So this is assuming everybody, has something that they want to write about, whether it is your novel or if it's a memoir, for example. Maybe you're finding blog posts, you're finding blogs that are good with telling family stories, or personal essays and things, and you can therefore demonstrate your style in that area. Or let's say you have that kimchi passion that I mentioned earlier, right? Say you're going after the local audience first. You might write a piece on how kimchi is suddenly appearing on all the tables of Italian restaurants next to the Parmesan cheese. Or if you want to go for the targeted journals and things, maybe you look at commercial cooking journals, right, for restaurateurs and things like that, about how new fermentation tanks are needed because the kimchi production is so high. Or for causes, maybe the kimchi fundraiser got the most donations in a single year ever. And with a blog, obviously any cooking blog, you could find plenty of kimchi opportunities.
What are you having for dinner tonight?
So that was what I had. What else did I want to tell you? I've got some samples of some more of the stuff I was doing in my other previous lifetime, because I'm shifting my technology books and things. But yeah, so that was me.
Okay, I'm gonna thank you. That was great. In case you didn't guess, Susanna is a great cook also. And, she and my husband have been having cook-offs, which is working for me. So I'm interested in this. I'm standing up because sitting is the new smoking, I've heard. So I'm really stand up now. What are you all writing? Like I see, it's nice to see so many different ages. How many people in here are writing or thinking about writing, like for magazines? Raise your hand. Anybody? Newspapers, journalism? Nothing? Okay, how about memoirs? Like this. Oh, wait, can I get a flicker?
Blogs.
Okay, blogs.
Yeah, video game blogs.
Oh, cool.
Interesting.
Very interesting. League. How about memoir, like story of your life sort of thing?
That's what I started because I used to do some writing for newspapers and things years ago. So now the memoir for myself, and then I see that I want to do some more. So
Good. Oh, that's great. That's great. And how about fiction? Short stories, novels? We have a science fiction author here, very, very well known, Janet. In case you have any questions about publishing science fiction, you can address it to this lady here in the front. Fiction, yes, I saw more hands over here. No?
Some
Yeah.
More memoir?
fiction.
How about nonfiction? Books about like how to do things or how to train your dog or anything like that? No nonfiction? So you just came just to hear about writing in general? Okay. Well, that's
let's write children's books.
children's books. Oh, right. I left out a very important category. Sorry. Don't want to be sitting next to her when you leave that out. Okay. So they asked me to talk about my lucky break because I publish novels pretty regularly, once or twice a year. I write adult fiction. So it seems like I've had a lucky break. And I guess I can tell you one story that felt like the lucky break, which was walking on the beach in Florida with my children on spring break. And my father-in-law came to, we were at my in-laws' condo, and he came to the balcony and yelled down at us, "Polly, your agent's on the phone, you have a deal." And it was like the scene out of a movie where I'm running up the sand to get the phone call from my agent. That's my lucky break, right? But except the reality is more like when Hillary Clinton lost her presidential bid, she said, "At least I've put 18 million cracks in the glass ceiling," but more or less that's what she said. And I think that's really more like what you've been hearing from Beth and from Suzanne, and you'll hear it from Susan too, and from me, is that writing is not like suddenly you're not a writer, and then over here you are a writer. It's not like that at all. It's more like 10 marathons in a row in the desert, and then climbing Mount Everest, and then dehydrated while you're dehydrated from the marathons in the desert, and then like falling off the top of Mount Everest and landing on sharp rocks. So that's kind of what it's like to be a writer. It's like a lot of different things. But if I had to pinpoint one break, I would actually, both of them kind of touched on what I see as my lucky break, which is I was, kind of trying to write novels for years. I mean, I'm talking like I'm old, like 25 years it took me to publish my first novel, a long time. And I was a biology major, I was going to be a doctor, and then I started writing last semester of college, said, "Oh, I really love writing. No, Dad, I'm not going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a writer." And he went, "Oh my God, you better get married." He had a point, but of course I wasn't ready to listen to that then. So I went to graduate school for writing. I thought I'll just get out, publish a novel, be famous. I'll have royalty checks, a golden retriever, a house in Vermont. None of that happened. Zero things happened like that. So nothing happened. Nothing happened. I mean, I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and I published a couple of short stories in literary journals that pay you in copies, like so that you could eat that, And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Then meanwhile, I got married. I had a couple of kids. I was reading, women's magazines, because that's what you do when you have kids in your pediatrician's office, right? You sit there and you read those women's magazines while your kids are doing God knows what to the toys on the floor. And I read Redbook, and I read an essay by Joyce Maynard. Does anybody know who she is? She was most famous for having an affair with J.D. Salinger, author of Catcher in the Rye, when she was like, how old? 17, 18, and he was 53. So that was her first claim to fame. But after that, she became a novelist, and she became a columnist, and she's quite a good columnist. Like, she wrote for a lot of newspapers and magazines, building her portfolio as Suzanne is doing now without having an affair with J.D. Salinger. And I read this essay in Redbook, and I thought, wow, that's really a great essay. And it was about dating after divorce. It was like this really, like pretty funny piece about what it's like to date when you are a single mom and have kids at home. I thought, I'd like to write one of those kinds of essays. I could do that. And so I went home and I wrote one. And it was about, actually it was called My Two Husbands, because at that point I didn't have two husbands, but I had one husband and an ex-husband, and they were friends. And I had both husbands in my life coming over for well, one I lived with, and the other one would still come over for dinner and still come over and play with the kids, and they became friends, and so it was My Two Husbands. So I wrote an essay, it was comic, light, wrote it, I submitted it to, and here's the best point, I submitted it to a contest. It was the Marblehead Arts Contest or something. I didn't win the contest, but I got an honorable mention. And that made me think, okay, somebody thinks it's good. So I sent it in to Ladies' Home Journal, and back in those days it was snail mail, you mailed it. So I mailed it to a name I picked off the masthead, which you're never supposed to do, but I did. I mailed it in, and they called me and bought it. And from there, that was kind of my first step. So that was the lucky break, selling that essay, because from there, I sold more essays. I started selling to Parents Magazine. I became a columnist. I did what Suzanne said. I was a columnist for Ladies' Home Journal and Parents at the same time. And I wrote for a lot of different women's magazines, building this portfolio back in the days before blogs were the way to do it, right? Blogs are a way to do it now. And later, I did sell a novel finally, and when I sold the novel, the editor, who's my editor at Ladies' Home Journal, she and I had become friends over many years, and she put that, she reviewed, it was The Wishing Hill, and she reviewed it in Ladies' Home Journal for as one of the summer's great reads, and put a big picture of it in the magazine, which at that time had 6 million readers or something. So it did well in sales, which got me the next book contract. So it was sort of like these series of little tiny breaks leading to a bigger break that then led to more novels. So I would say that was my lucky break. And I have other things that I've put up in a blog that you can read on my website if you want to read the other lucky breaks. There were several, but I want to give Susan time to talk, and I'll sit down. Thank you.
And now you're inspiring me to stand up.
Okay.
Unlike Holly, I didn't have two husbands, I didn't have one. So, but I did have 3 kids who were all facing entrance to college, one right after the other, so I thought I really better get going here. And I just tried to break into illustration, textbook illustration, and that was really difficult. In those days, you had to take your portfolio around, and you would stand in front of the assembled multitude, the group of art staff who would look at your work, and either they would go, "Oh, that's wonderful, we love that," and you would never hear from them again. Or you'd suffer the humiliation of standing there, turning pages after pages, and nothing, absolutely nothing. And you didn't know when to leave. It was like, okay, are we done now? Nobody said a word. Finally, I went into Houghton Mifflin one day, and who should be there but a friend of mine from MassArt who also grew up with me in Belmont. She lived on my street. My cousin Patty threw a rock at her. Sorry, I meant to hit Beverly. That was her sister. We had a history, so she immediately put me in touch with her friend in New York, who was a really well-known agent, and it was clear sailing for me from that time on in terms of getting illustration work. Once you get an agent, she knew everyone. I never got another rejection because she got them all. So it made me really happy. Because prior to that time, as I was putting a portfolio together, I remember one day bringing home one of my students, and I wanted to draw him as part of my portfolio. I went to the mail, and I got another rejection letter, and I thought, so I went into the dining room and cried, and then I came out, got my paper, and started to draw him while dinner was cooking. So anyway, after that, my first break, I'm glad I brought this, because I hadn't intended to talk about this part of it, but my first break came when my agent got me this book, written, I did not write this one, but I did illustrate it. It was written by Crescent Dragon Wagon, who was the daughter of Charlotte Zolotow, who was really well known in children's books. So yeah, and I have become friendly with Crescent since then, who is a force to be reckoned with, I can tell you, but that's for another time. And after that, since I had a little experience now with illustrating for trade books, which is what I wanted to do, that was my dream, I started trying my own. And I usually, like Beth said, writing for me is sheer torture. So I wanted to write a book that was born in the heart of darkness. My son was getting a divorce, and he was heartbroken at the possibility of losing his son. And I wanted to do something, I wasn't even sure whether it would become a book. I just was doing drawings to commemorate the life they had together. And another friend of mine, who was a well-known writer, kept looking at what I was doing, and I did bring the original dummy, and this is what you prepare to send to a publisher. And this is what I sent to him. I don't think you guys have seen this. This is the original for the Daddy book. And she forced me to send it to her publisher. She said, Susan, you have a book. She dragged me to the post office, made me write out the address, and then we went home. And the following day, or maybe 2 days later, I had a phone call. And it was the publisher. And he said, Susan, this is Stephen Roxburgh. And my heart started pounding. And he said, I'd like to publish your book. I got so nervous. I said, oh, I'm on the phone with my son from Germany. Can I call you back? What an idiot. I did do that. And, well, the rest is history. And it was reviewed in the New York Times. And from there on in, the other books followed quite nicely. But they are not as easy as you might think. I have this quote from Mara Sendak on my drafting table. And I just stick it there every time I start something, because whenever I get frustrated, I remind myself that it took him 12 years from start to finish with Wild Things. So, yeah. And he started off, I think the original title was All the Pretty Horses, or All the Horses, or All the Wild Horses, that was it. And he says, a picture book is not only what most people think it is, an easy thing with a lot of pictures in it to read to small children. For me, it's a damn difficult thing to do, like working in a complicated and challenging poetic form. It demands so much that you have to be on top of the situation all the time. Finally, I achieved something so simple and so put together, so seamless, that it looks as if you knocked it off in no time. One stitch showing and you've lost the game.
That's great.
Because what happens is that every single cocktail party I go to, which is not many these days, but people will always come up and say to me, oh, I have a great idea for a children's book. And most people do, but it's the hashing out of the idea that's really, really difficult. Because the language has to be pared down. You can't let the language step on the illustrations. You need to make the illustrations expand on what you say. And I'll just show you one example before I'm quiet, and then you can. But in this Daddy book, the initial illustration, which is different from the dummy, says, my daddy can cross the street alone. My grandson gave me that line when I was holding him in my arms. We were on the 19th floor of a condo building in Germany, waiting for my son to come out on the ground floor. And when he came out and turned around and waved to us, my grandson said to me, Nana, my daddy can cross the street alone. And I thought, wow, he was about 2 and a half, I think. And I'm thinking, what does that mean to him? So I don't know if you can see it because I'm too far away, but the street here has automobiles and neon signs and street lights and things like that, but as you, in the distance, the street begins to morph into a jungle. The trees, the buildings become trees, there's a monkey hanging from the street light, there's a cardinal up in the, on this street light, and an elephant down the road a piece, a tiger, lions and tigers and bears. And there are many other animals in the book, so.
Sure it's not science fiction?
Sort of.
Okay, well, we've all covered some of the topics. Like I mentioned, Nancy was gonna talk a little bit about getting an agent, but, you know, we wanna open it up to you, and feel free to ask us any questions, either genre specific or about the topics we touched on. Again, I concentrate in middle grade and young adult. Suzanne's, our expert in magazine writing at this time, and also children's book publishing. Holly, has written it all, adult, chick lit, memoir, fiction, mystery, ghostwriting. She's a ghostwriter for celebrities. And, which may be for Nancy soon, you never know.
You never know. Her tell-all with Bradley Cooper.
Yeah, she'll make it happen. And Susan, of course, picture book illustrator and writer, which is kind of unusual to do both.
Question?
Yes, Jenna.
Regarding agents and magazines, you know, often I'll pick a magazine or something, I'll see, gee, you know, I'd like to write something for that. And then I go looking through all the front, and they'll have in big bold letters, no one solicited manuscripts. So what do you do about that? You know, if you've never actually had a magazine pick up the story.
I ignore it. I usually, what I do, and I've written for a lot of different magazines, national magazines as well as regional, and what I do is I look at the masthead and I call them. I actually call them up and say, I have, is this staff written, this column or this essay section or these articles, are they staff written? Or do you have freelancers write them, and I'm interested in pitching a story about blah, blah, blah. Is there an editor I could talk to or email directly about it? And then they'll give you the information. Just call them on the phone. Because they are so inundated by emails that it's often just faster and more effective to just call them up.
Yeah, I'd rather talk to people on the phone.
Yeah. And they're, you know, if you don't get through, you don't get through, but most of the time you can.
I've also entered magazine contests to get their attention, and then they'll often let you write a piece. I've done that before. There are lots of magazines have contests now, and you're dealing directly with somebody on the staff, so if you win it or get something.
Sure, and also for bloggers, the thing about writing, as you've probably picked up from all of us, is that because it is like, you know, crossing the desert, climbing the Himalayas and falling onto sharp rocks, it is really true that one thing, you just have to keep trying different paths, and one thing will lead you to another. So for bloggers, for example, I often get, I'll put up a blog, usually on my site and then on Huffington Post, or sometimes I'll write a guest post for some other book blogger, and sometimes I'll get contacted even by a magazine or a newspaper that then want to, like WBUR contacted me to use one of the pieces or to have me write something different but related to that, and then that was made into a commentary for WBUR, and so you know, these things can lead you places. So just go as many places as you can is what I would advise. For wherever you're starting out writing, just try everything. That's really the best advice.
Did you have anything, Suzanne, about that? But when they say
Unsolicited.
You know, I usually just go for low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's, you know.
Well, it's a good way to build up. You have to do that first. That's true. It's very helpful to do that first, to write features for your local newspapers. So you have clip. They used to, in my day, you used to actually cut them out and put them in a scrapbook. So it was called a clip file. But now it's just a portfolio, and you can put it online like Suzanne's doing and have them on your website, or just have them available to show to editors. Yes, you do. It is helpful to build up that resume.
Well, now that I hear that recommendation, though, that's what I'm going to do. I was always like, who was accepting, and figured that was going to be easier. But
yeah.
But
it's like what Suzanne says too. You have to definitely like come to your library and read the magazines or look at them online and know what they're taking, what kind of voice they like, what their audience is, what would appeal to them. There's a book called Writer's Market that will tell you a lot, and your library should have that. That will tell you a lot about what magazines want. Often the magazines have submission guidelines online, and they will tell you what they're looking for.
so.
Right, and often a lot of the editors are online now. They're on
Yeah.
Twitter, they're tweeting, you
Yeah.
can go find them pretty easily and try to follow them for a little while and see what they're doing, saying, what they're
Yep.
looking for.
Yep, definitely.
It's much more open than it used to be.
Yeah.
So I guess, why does it matter to have a clip book or portfolio? I mean, do the editors really care?
They want to know you can write. If you are an expert, though, like Siggy is an expert on, this friend of mine here is an expert on financial matters for women, say, which is pretty close to what you are. Then she has a professional expertise that she could pitch. And so she might not have as much of a portfolio as a writer, but she has credentials, or if you have letters after your name and you're a psychologist or something, you can sometimes get away with it because of that. But often they just want the clips to know that you can write.
And that you can make deadlines,
And-
and that
yeah.
you can do, some of it is, I think, processing. They wanna know that you can
Or your
function
voice, they
within-
want to see your voice.
Well, the other thing is, if you're looking for an agent, if you wanna get published, you have to have a lot of credentials. They're not gonna look at you if you don't have anything, if you don't have a platform, a portfolio. So, they really are gonna look at your history and your resume.
So you can't just show them your partially written novel and
No.
they'll
Well, actually, I would argue that you can still.
Really?
Yeah, I would.
With
There,
an agent?
if you have a real, if you can't show an agent a partially written novel. Usually, you have to have the whole thing.
Okay.
I mean, when you initially submit, you might only submit a query, and if the agent's guideline says, "Oh, send me a query in 3 chapters," you would do that. But you better have that whole novel, like pretty well done before you show it to an agent.
But it definitely, if
Um,
you're writing in a letter saying, you know.
It helps if you have the credentials, but if it's a huge idea, like a big idea, or a new idea for a romance line or something, they might consider it, even if you don't have, if it's a popular fiction idea.
But always, when they're scanning really quickly, whoever it is, an editor, an
Yeah.
agent, anyone, trying to enter into a conference, trying to get your work done, they just scan really quickly, and it shows like Holly's history, written for Red Book, Ladies Home Journal, all these, that's what they're, as opposed to the person like, I've got a great idea for a romance novel, And you can, what Suzanne's talking about is so important. A lot of it's how you spin it, and so you're trying to create an image and what your expertise is, and this is my voice, and this is my thing, and my angle, and all of it kind of, you spin it
I am the
into
kimchi expert of
Yeah.
New England, for example.
Right, you can spin anything, you're promoting yourself, that's how you have to think about it. Get work done.
Another thing to do is go to places where you can network with writers and editors and agents, and that would be like Grub Street or Breadloaf Writers Conference, or there are bazillion writers conferences. So just look at who's going to be there, and would you have a chance to actually meet face to face with editors and agents? And you can do that often at those conferences.
Yeah.
And even if that's not going to be the agent for you or the editor for you, you will get really good feedback on your elevator pitch, on your idea, and they'll give you suggestions for how to proceed. But sometimes they'll take you right on this if they like your idea. I've seen that happen at Breadloaf.
I think that you probably have heard from all of us, and I know the same for Nancy and Edith, so much has happened to us just through connections and networking. And those little cracks we're talking about, taking advantage, you just have to be ready, and when an opportunity hits.
One thing leads to another.
Yep.
And
It
also
does.
kind of trusting where you are. I think trusting, you have to keep pushing, but also when doors are opening, sometimes you'll see later that it was for a reason, and you see how it all connects, so.
Right.
Kind of trusting where you are and keep going.
I was interested in the concept or the factuality of self-publishing. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that done with an agent, without an agent? What's the financial?
There's different models.
Right.
It's all, I mean, I think it's never with an agent, but
Yeah.
because it's,
You
you're
don't
doing
need
it
an agent
yourself.
yourself.
Yeah.
There's different models where you can do literally all the work yourself. And then there's places that will do literally everything for you other than the writing. That costs more.
And the
understandably.
money up front is yours.
Yes.
It's yes. As opposed to traditional publishers pay the author.
A good person to talk to is the gentleman behind you in the red plaid, Dr. Paul Jansen, who's published many books on his own. Self-published.
Yes, and I've also self-published. I did it all on my own.
Yeah.
One of my novels I self-published before I was with Penguin.
I've
All different
self-published.
arrangements.
I've self-published 2 nonfiction books. Nancy's self-published, and Susan.
I've done only one, just
One.
this one.
Yes.
This, yeah, this book is, I wrote for kids who have been traumatized. And my former publisher, who no longer does picture books, he sold his company, but he loved it, and he gave me a free agent, and she shopped it around to everyone. All the trade publishers rejected it because it was too psychologically based. All the site publishers rejected it because I didn't have a PhD, so there I was. I had excellent recommendations from psychiatrists at McLean's and another German psychiatrist who works with third world children who have been traumatized, but I didn't, I just couldn't find a niche anywhere. So he helped me self-publish. And it was relatively painless, except financially, because I had to pay to get all the artwork scanned, and there's quite a bit of it here.
And that's a very high-end self-publisher. Susan works with called Novelist.
No, what I went through CreateSpace, but Novelist handles the
editorial and stuff. So you can, go to a company that you hire their services. But CreateSpace is the easiest place to do it on your own.
And if you don't have illustrations, it's pretty cheap. It's
on Amazon.
Yeah, and also it depends whether you're going to do a print book and an ebook.
If you do just an ebook, it's free.
Yeah,
basically.
Just time.
But it's basically free. And anybody under 30 can probably do it pretty easily.
Anyone under 10 can do it really easy.
It's pretty easy.
I know.
Any other questions about anything that anybody's working on?
Oh, I know what I was gonna tell you. There's one other funny story with this. I had an email from Andre Dubusse, who wrote one of the blurbs of this book. He really likes it. And he had been at a conference in Florida. And he wrote to me and he said, oh, I met this editor from, and I can't remember where he was from, but he said he wants you to send him the book because I told him how great it was, and he's really interested in publishing it. So I thought, all right, I'll send it off. So I sent it to him, and I wrote a nice little cover letter, and the guy wrote back this lovely letter. I mean, he was very appreciative, and was specific in his reasons why he couldn't publish it. But Andre wrote back, and he said, well, darn, but that's really a promising rejection. That's going to be my new favorite oxymoron.
Yes.
How do you market a self-published book?
You want to start?
My best recommendation is to marry a book publicist. That's what I did.
But I did not marry a book publicist, so I had to do it all on my own. And it's actually not as hard as you might think. You can go a few different ways. You can contact book bloggers yourself and write guest posts. Ask them to review your book, and a lot of book bloggers will do that. You can go online, and there's lots of online advertising you can buy through like Kindle Book Review or all different ads you can buy. You can buy Twitter ads, you can buy magazine ads, you can buy your own reviews for Publishers Weekly or something like that, though I wouldn't recommend it, they're really expensive. Mostly it's about networking, it's about reaching out to other people in the indie publishing community, writers in your genre, whatever that might be, and asking them for help, and they'll help you, and they'll help you, put you in touch with places where you can do it. The deeper your pockets are, the better your book tends to do, because you're buying for visibility. And that's one reason I switched to traditional publishing to Penguin. I do a lot better with them because I don't have to pay for any of that, and they do a more worldwide distribution. But with this, I did fine with the self-publishing, and I certainly made my money back, and it was fun. It was like a crash course in digital media, but it's mostly online. Most of the advertising is online. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
For indie books.
I would get back to the kimchi concept too. We have a friend who wrote a book, and it's a novel, but it has two driving elements in it. One is the Irish Mafia, Connie Hambley her name is, and the other are horses. So, I mean, she kind of targeting some of those concepts that might not be, you might not think about it, you think about your book as a whole, and the story, the arching story that you're telling. But trying to identify what some of those key things that you can then go and push into, like, finding all the kimchi lover Facebook pages, finding all the places, the horse horses are easy, there's, millions of ways you can go.
Yeah.
But figuring out, even if your story is a general story or a general,
Right, those target audiences are key, yeah.
Yeah.
finding where they're
Definitely.
hanging out and then going and saying, participating in a conversation and,
Yep.
and letting people know that, hey, this book might be of interest,
Mhm.
without pushing it down their throats.
That's really good advice, yeah.
Mhm.
I was gonna say niche marketing is so much easier.
And that's
than-
true also for traditional publishing. You have
Yeah.
to do the same thing. And people think, oh, you have to market all your own work when you're self-published. Well, guess what? When you're a traditional
Oh, yeah.
publisher, you'll get a publicist for what, like 3
Uh-huh.
months maybe to do the book launch, and then, but you still have to do a lot of it yourself.
And I actually was talking to an editor the other day who's saying they now, when they're considering a book, a manuscript, even if it's fabulous, they want to look at that person's platform. Do they know how to use Twitter? Do they know how
That's
to use
true.
things
Yeah.
online?
Yeah.
Are they online and creating their own platform? That's going hand in hand now. I was told when I started off with Alice Zen in 2008 to create a platform, and so she's basically saying a person needs to come with it, or I'm not even gonna read their work. It's a
So
reality thing.
when you say to, like, say it's a book about horses,
Mhm.
and so you want to market to the horse people. So say there's an organization called Equestrian Riders or something. Like, what do? You find out if they have a magazine and try and write a little blurb in
Yeah,
it?
you could
or-
do that. You could definitely do that. If they have a website or a Facebook page, you could post stuff on there.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could go to their meetings. My first book was a memoir called The Gerbil Farmer's Daughter, because my dad really did
Great.
raise
It is
9,000 gerbils in our backyard.
That's our
And he
favorite
was,
book.
yeah, and I actually ended up working with the American Gerbil Society. And
She's
became
a rock star. in
became a
that world.
yeah. So I would go. I still go sometimes to their meetings, and they're very fun. There's you
judges
would not
gerbils.
believe how many kinds of gerbils there are, and they're judged the same way as at dog shows by their conformation and color and their movements. So I was the Gerbil Olympics judge, where they involved. The contest involved how fast could your gerbil chew a paper cup, or run his exercise ball through a maze. Some would go backwards. They never won. So yeah. But I mean, I marketed through gerbil lovers as well as through other like book lovers. So it was a fun project because I could do. And my dad was in the Navy, so he was a Navy. He's the captain of a destroyer when he decided to raise gerbils. So I went to Navy bases, and I took the book to Navy bases and did that. And that was yes, I did. That was less fun than doing Gerbil Society people. So yeah, so just find your audiences. That's what I would say.
And also for self-published books, you can get a lot of talking gigs like this. I wrote mine on gluten-free. It was when gluten-free was a big deal. My daughter was diagnosed 10 years ago with celiac disease. And I got approached all the time to talk to groups and sold a lot of my books that way. So you could go to horse groups, horse meetings, and sell your books that way. It's a good
And
way
even
to do it.
online, finding places where people are talking,
Forums,
websites
yeah.
where there's forums or discussion groups or comments below articles and posting conversationally.
Yeah.
With perhaps links back to what you want to point at.
I mean, it's weird. There's a fine line between, that's kind of, I guess, called contextual marketing, when you're doing that sort of thing, when you're approaching audiences that really would have an interest in your, and then there's the buy my book kind of tweets that you're like, oh my God, delete. You don't want to do that either, because that's just annoying. So you just have to find your people.
But we do publicize a lot, even, like we were saying, we spend a lot of time in it. It's just the reality of it now.
Yeah.
So how do you children's books? Among educators, of course, and parents, I guess.
Yeah, mostly for this particular one, educators.
Right.
And
That's the
parents.
one I picked out of the live, was on display. I just pulled that right off and read it. I loved it.
Oh, thank
Because
you.
I like the picture.
Yeah.
And it had elephants. So it was marketed to me that way, but as the author of children's books, to get them in the hands of people to read them, because many children's books to me have messages that are so right between the eyes for adults.
Yeah.
They're lovely, and a lot of them are almost poetic. So how do you get that kind of message to people?
Well, I have a friend, the woman who wrote the introduction section for the book, for this particular book, is a therapist. And she's primarily a grief therapist. She works with both children and adults, and she goes around she presents at conferences all over the country. And she's done this for me several times. And strangely enough, she was out in California last year for a huge international conference, and she went for a swim in the morning before she had to give her presentation. And she uses Edna as the grand finale of her whole show. And she also has an elephant and a mouse puppet that she presents. And she's great. She's so enthusiastic, but she went in for the swim, and when she came up at the end of the pool, she looked up, and there was this gigantic stone elephant sitting up. And she thought, oh my God, that's an omen. And then, after she gave her presentation, she went into dinner, and she had been held up by people who wanted to ask her questions. She said, I sat down next to this woman, and all of a sudden I looked at her, and I said, what is that? She said, you have elephant earrings. So she said everywhere she goes, she finds elephant connections, yeah. We had breakfast one day, and this woman came along with an elephant necklace, and she's contacted me since then. She wants me to have it.
Nice. That's a good way to network. For me in children's books, my best way of connecting is going to schools. I do a lot of school visits.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah, that's private, because kids, children's books are a little easier, picture books, because moms and dads bring kids to readings and to events. For tween and young adult, they just rarely, it's nice to see some younger people, but rarely go to book readings or these kind of events. So it's best to go to them.
So what do you do when you go to the school?
I do a couple things. I basically I have a general talk that I usually do to a large auditorium, up to 300 people, and I'll give a talk. And it's pretty interactive. The kids ask a lot of questions, and we talk about publishing and publishing a book. But I also have creative writing workshops I offer. The school hires me to do afterward. And then, I have a order form, so often you get a lot of orders that way. And I still feel like face-to-face is the best way to market yourself and make those connections, and then you tell your friend in Florida, and you tell your friend in California.
That's true.
I still think it's the best way, so to get out there, and it's grassroots. My book, I Am a Freak, which came out years ago, is doing better every single year. It still gets nominated for awards every year since it's been out. I'm making more money on it every year because I think it's just getting slow, it's building slowly. Books take a long time for word
Yeah,
to
it used to
spread.
be, the word used to be like, it's the book launch, and it's the publicity about the book launch, and those are your sales, and then that's it, it's dead. But these days, there are so many different ways to connect with people that it's really more of a snowball marketing approach where you just gradually build an audience, and it might take a while, it might not take off right away, but don't give up. Because you just keep pushing that snowball, and it gets bigger, and you'll
Surprising.
be it is amazing.
And that's why you do have to work at it every day, even if it feels like you're kind of wasting time, you're not getting anywhere. You do have to work on publicity every day.
I have a question about as a young adult writer, sort of as an adult writing from a young adult voice, like how you, I don't know, not develop it, but practice it, or make it authentic, or how like, can you speak to that a little bit about
yeah,
like,
I
what
can.
that
A lot of
process
people,
was for you?
Yeah, a lot of people ask that when we talk about that, young adult authors, and I'm tween or middle grade author. It really has to come naturally. It has to be a voice that you can enter pretty easily, and you remember that time in your life. I think a lot of people write, particularly write for children, middle grade, teens. You write from a very tender spot in your life, and where was your difficult time in your tender, invisible years where you had a lot of angst. For many people, it's high school, and that's why you see a lot of YA books. For me, it was middle school, the invisible years where I didn't count, and I had a really hard time finding I didn't feel like I had control over my life. I didn't feel empowered. I didn't know where I was going. I was tiny and shy, average student. So I think a lot of us who write for younger age groups come from that place. And you have to be able to enter it. Writers often say they're failed actors, actors say they're failed writers. I think they're very close cousins, acting and writing. You really go into the zone and become the person and the character. You're playing parts. So I think if you have to force it and it's not a natural voice, for me, I kept also, my protagonists were 12 or 13, and finally my editor said, "You're an 11-year-old." You think you're writing for 12 or 13-year-olds. Yeah.
You bet.
And I am. I always, that's my age, 11. And so for a while I didn't have it quite right. I thought I was writing for an older group until I was told, no, you're not. So you have to find it, but you'll find that place and that voice and that, but you have to get inside that head of that person and remember what it was to be that age. Yeah.
How did you feel when that was told to you? Were you okay with that? It's beautiful.
It was a little funny. You know, I realized too.
If you choose to answer.
Yeah, well, it's funny too because my kids are now older, and I did have them kind of as sounding boards at that age. It was my daughter first, and my son. Then they got older. Now they're in their 20s, and I'm like bugging nieces and nephews in the family, asking them questions. I'm a little out of touch, so that can be hard. I do have to. I'll read magazines or watch TVs or shows or movies to see what's interesting to 11-year-olds, where their voices are. I have been doing this maybe 10 years now. The kids are emotionally older every year. So my target group is really 6th grade. It's now 5th. The 6th graders are getting more like teenagers, and it's changing. So I'm at that cusp, that tween year, and it's definitely getting a little lower. And I was about 14 when I was going through what 10-year-olds I think are going through.
Yeah, true. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions about anything? I think it's a little past 7. So we all have some of our work up here. You're welcome to come look at it and take our cards. We all have websites and blogs so you can subscribe to them and follow us. Learn more about our group, Nevertheless Writers. We're on Facebook and Twitter. We do this partly to support the writing community, so feel free to contact any of us.
This is, I mean, you did a great thing just coming out tonight, not just for our sakes, but for your own sakes. You know, this is like what you need to do to move forward with your own writing is find other writers and find out how it's done. So don't be shy about asking questions. You're doing the right thing by being here tonight.
It's a lonely occupation, so it's good to come out and get inspired, recharged, and then go be alone
and
and
to
write.
know it's possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Could you give us your website one at a time and repeat it twice?
All right.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay.
Okay, so my website is the same as my name. It's ElizabethAtkinson.com. You want me to say it again? ElizabethAtkinson.com. And like I said, I have a blog. I have all my information about my school visits, and you can also contact me. I answer a lot of book report questions, which I love. I also Skype all over the country, and my 1-hour visit with schools and Skyping is free. I do it for free.
That's great. My website is www.smdewitt.com. That's DEWITT. smdewitt.com.
And I'm at authorhollyrobinson.com. That's authorhollyrobinson.com.
And I am at susanparadis.net.
Speak up.
I am at susanparadis.net. That's Paradis. susanparadis.net.
And Nevertheless Writers are on Facebook and Twitter. You can follow us.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and thank you to the library for having us.
Thank you,
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.